You can see I've escaped from my box. The backdrop behind me is a little bit different. I'm in the playing hall of the 2018 Chess.com Art of Man Open Tournament, and this is the morning after the night before. I've snuck into the tournament hall. You can see all the boards behind me to give my Game of the Day report from round one. And what an extraordinary tournament this is. There are 165 players in this open tournament from 37 nations. That's the latest count at any rate. And there are 20 players rated over 2,700. It is fantastically strong. Why are they here? Well, first prize is £50,000 and there is an enormous prize fund. So that's part of the reason that they're here. But also the conditions here are wonderful. I'm afraid my camera doesn't pick it up very well, but this is a splendid playing hall. Beautiful Victorian building. So conditions are really nice. It's a really sociable tournament as well. So that's why players are here. So what happened in the first round? Well, interesting to see some of the favourites actually not winning. So we had, for example, Anish Giri, Wesley So, Hikaru Nakamura, Vladimir Kramnik, players who you might think will breeze through this first round against players rated 300 points lower. Well, they all drew, so there were quite a few upsets. But I've picked as my game of the day from round one, game between English international master David Eggleston with white against the Indian grandmaster Vidit Gujarati. So let's turn our attention to this game. I think this was absolutely fascinating. So it's a gioco piano played by Eggleston with white, and well, you could say there aren't clear variations here. It's about ideas, and that's the attraction of playing this, I guess, with white. That you're not going to be caught out by some move on move 25, so you're playing a real game of chess. And this move bishop g5, which of course white is absolutely not obliged to play with bishop g5, but this introduces very sharp play indeed, because with black's bishop outside the pawn chain, then this pin is rather annoying. So, I mean, there are various ways one can play this. One could play with queen e7 and bishop e6, for example, and later on perhaps break the pin. But Vidit plays in the most principled way and the most aggressive way, playing g5. And this has been played before, so that if the bishop were to drop to g3, then black can try and build an attack on the king side, although it's quite risky because one's king is exposed. This was played, for example, in the game between Ho Yifan and Ding Liren, which was an absolutely wild game. But if we just go back, Eggleston simply took on g5. Just an absolutely outrageous sacrifice. Of course, one has seen this in very similar positions, but to play it at such an early stage is absolutely fascinating. So you can see that with the queen and bishop lined up on the knight on f6, then black can't easily escape this pin. Sorry, I seem to be struggling to highlight the pieces. But having said that, it's actually quite difficult for white to exploit this. Really, one needs the queen's knight to come over to get to d5, for example, or perhaps g3 and then to f5 or h5 to exploit this. So this is a very long-term sacrifice. White is hoping to build pressure very slowly and relying on the fact that it takes black a long time to actually break this pin. So very interesting. I suspect, I was looking at my database, and I suspect that Eggleston might have seen this played in a game earlier in 2018. So Vidit played queen e7 here, but in this game between Kovalenko and Meskov's Tallinn 2018, bishop e6 was played. Now this is really interesting, and Kovalenko won a very nice game like this, and he got in this move d4, and well, if black were to take on d4, then e5 breaks open the position, followed by knight e4. And I would just wonder whether Eggleston had seen that game and thought, okay, maybe I can do something here. Vidit didn't put the bishop on e6, which does invite white to get in d4 and potentially d5. He was much more careful, and here he played the bishop to d7. It seems natural to exchange bishops with bishop e6, but as I said, it does set up a potential tactic with d4, d5. Here, if black were very, very worried about white's attack, it is possible to give back the exchange straight away with rook h6. And if this is taken, then I don't think this is too bad for black. But it's also possible for white simply to play h5 here and to continue the attack. That stops rook g6, for example. But Vidit played very coolly. He didn't panic. He didn't feel the need to return material, and he simply played bishop d7. Now I wonder here if a best possibility for white here is to play rook a e1 with potentially these ideas of d4 and taking, and then e5, as in the game I just showed a moment ago. But after a long think, Eggleston played bishop d5, so he's making way for the knight to come to c4 and then bounce around to e3, which could potentially be very strong. But watch what happens here. Rook a g8. So those rooks are connected. There is still a problem with the pin with the bishop on g5, and this is a very important moment in the game where black has developed pieces but still has to decide what to do about this pin. The knight is coming around to e3, so what do you do? Well, rook h6 is still possible, but Vidit played in a very aggressive way. He gave up his queen with knight takes d5. Now if pawn takes knight, then simply f6, and well, black is ending up a clear piece up, and well, the pin is gone and must be good. So let's just go back. So Eggleston took the queen on e7. So now we have a really intriguing situation where black has 3 minor pieces against the queen, but a queen and 2 pawns. But what's interesting is that white can't actually use those g and h pawns very well, and with this sacrifice, in fact, black's pieces are so beautifully coordinated now. So well, here's a very important moment. Eggleston simply gave up the h pawn, but if he'd played g3, then after king f8, black is still threatened to play rook takes h4, and this is still very, very difficult. But instead he gave back the pawn straight away with knight e3, rook takes pawn, and g3, and the rook simply dropped back to h6. But this is tricky. So black's potential attack on the h file can be dealt with the queen. That's no problem at all if black doubles. But here Vidit played an excellent move, which I think must have been underestimated by Eggleston. He played rook f8, so he's switching the line of attack from the g and h files to the f file, and in combination with the dark square bishop on c5 pointing at f2, this is very, very unpleasant, and really the queen is just a target for attack in this position actually. I mean, black is so well coordinated. So the king tried to escape, but I'm afraid it was in vain. I mean, there are many ways for black to continue here, but I think Vidit selected an excellent move, driving the queen away. If that pawn is taken, then let's push the queen away and then take on d3, and you can see, well, black's bishops look amazing in combination with the rooks. f2 is going to cave in. Black will play e4 to cement that bishop on d3. I think it must be a winning position. Excuse me, we've leapt ahead a bit. So after d5, the queen dropped to g2. And now actually there's a very simple winning idea. One could just take on e3 and double on the h file, followed by rook h1 and rook h2. I think this wins straight away actually, but bishop h3 was also very strong. And then he took on e3 and rook f6. So it's very similar. Basically, black's rooks are invading and there is no defense here at all. Let's keep that king boxed in, and e4. So black would like to bring the knight to e5, therefore d4 prevents the knight coming into the middle. And now the rook invades. And the threat is to play knight f5 and to take the pawn on e3. White is utterly lost here. Eggleston thrashed around with c4, but that allowed the other knight to leap into the game. And I'm afraid the end was a complete rout. You can see that, well, the queen on g1 is rather pitifully placed. It has no chance to activate, even though black's king has no pawn cover, but I'm afraid there's no chance to attack it. Let's see how the game concluded. And now white's king gets dragged out. It's almost in a mating net here. A check. And rook f6 threatens to setting up a mating net. So the king ran. And now, when we were looking at this online, when we were commentating, lots of people online were saying, yeah, it's mating however many moves, mating 10 or 11 or something like that, with e3. But well, in fact, Vidit played a very simple move. He simply played knight takes rook, but people were kind of going, why didn't he play for the mate? Well, it brings me back to an old adage. I can't remember which Soviet trainer said, I would rather win an endgame with 2 clear extra pawns than try to find a mate in 20. Sometimes you just got to be practical, and after a few seconds, Vidit simply took the rook in the corner. And so black has rook and bishop and knight against the queen, and this passed pawn is steaming down the board. And not to mention white's king completely boxed in. King f7 just gets out of the pin. And now Vidit, well, it looks like he's steering the king, the pawn down the board with bishop f3, but actually he sets up a mating net here. Or perhaps Eggleston was being very kind and actually set up the mate himself after, in fact, he resigned here after king b5, then bishop e2 is mate. So at a certain point after the queen sacrificed, it turned into a bit of a rout, but nevertheless I thought it was a really enterprising sacrifice. And maybe if we tweak this a little bit with white, it's possible to present black with some really difficult challenges in this game. So but yeah, very, very nice sacrifice there from Vidit, which completely changed the nature of the game. Hope you enjoyed that, and I do hope you'll tune in for more of my round reports. I'll be here tomorrow morning as well with my round 2 selection. And if you're not a subscriber to the channel, then do click up there somewhere, and yeah, check out all the other videos that we have on the channel. Thanks for watching.